Okie dokie. All right, let's start off with a question. Go ahead.
So, not really about programming, but like, I'm guessing if you would take your iOS class, that would count as another CS language.
Yeah, so the question was, if you take my iOS class, does that count for extra credit? Unfortunately, it does not. It just counts for an elective. Like, you can get college course credit, but it doesn't count as any, yeah, it doesn't satisfy any requirements. Unfortunately, it is its own operating system, language. While the paradigms are similar, it's completely different. I mean, there's similarities, obviously, but yeah, so unfortunately not. But you can take it. And if you want to take it, you can take it either online or you can sit in on the class and just show up and not get a grade. If you are interested in learning iOS just for a hobby or whatever and not care about the course credit. Or you can take the course and just do pass-fail. And you'll see based on this course whether you'd be likely to pass the course because the courses are very similar. So, yes, another question?
Can I do that for the video game class during summer?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not sure how that would. I'm not sure what requirements that one requires. So the question for the live streamers are, can you take my 3D game development course for credit or for pass-fail? I mean, and I believe so. Again, I'm not sure how that goes toward your requirements for graduation, whether you have to take a letter graded for that. Go ahead.
Will those videos be available for anyone?
Which videos?
The 2D and 3D games?
Yeah, so on the channel right now, there are, I don't know, say 8 or 9 3D game development videos on there already. So if you go to the playlist section on the channel, you'll see those videos. And so you can get a sense of what the course is like. I don't have live streams for that course, but I'll probably do it this summer. That starts in May. But again, you can get a sense of it. That's going to be taught in Unreal Engine 4, if you guys are familiar. We'll also do some 2D game development, probably in the Godot engine, and just kind of get you familiar with 2D game development. We'll go through the whole 3D modeling, et cetera, et cetera. So, yep, that's all actually covered. I do have 3D modeling tutorials on the channel too, so if that is any way interesting to you, go check those out. Cool. Any other questions before we begin? Sweet. All right, so Android. First, I'm gonna throw this at you. So yesterday, homework 1 was due. If you had some issues submitting, that's fine. I'm pretty lenient on the first submission. You know, a lot of you guys had issues setting up GitLab and pushing and whatnot. Perfectly fine. Just get that resolved before next week. And let's talk about this homework assignment. So this is homework 2. So I'm just going to read this, but during the semester you will conceive, design, and create an Android mobile app that you will release. So we kind of mentioned this already, but for the first homework assignment, I guess second. See, I didn't QA my notes as I said. For the second homework assignment, this will be, you will come up with 5 different mobile app ideas. You will develop this app throughout the semester, and it'll become your final project, okay? So no final exam. We do have a final exam block scheduled. Just ignore that. That goes for both my 402 and 507 course. All right, so you might pick an idea that solves a problem that you have or is something that you're familiar with, whatever your domain expertise is. You might be an expert scuba diver, you might be a firefighter, volunteer paramedic, you might be all these different things outside of the university. You can pick that, and that's a really good idea for a mobile app because not only do you have the expertise in the field that you can pull from, but you also have an insight into maybe how that profession or that hobby would use your app, rather than saying, oh, I don't know, I want to do an app on quantum physics. It's like, I don't know that much about it, so I would be a terrible developer for that because I would struggle in the content of it. All right, so as I mentioned, pick a passion, pick a hobby, pick something that you're familiar with, or sometimes I've had students working for companies and their boss is like, hey, can you build a mobile app for the company? And while you're being technically paid for that, that's a great thing, and I'll accept that for this class. A lot of students will also use that as their kind of to supplement their senior design project. Sometimes they'll do like a web app / mobile app combination with their group or however that works. I have no idea, but you may do that as well. So really, I just want you to have a mobile app developed at the end of this course, and then you'll be graded on it. So pick something. Well, for this homework assignment, you'll actually pick 5 ideas. So obviously 4 of those ideas you'll be throwing away or not using, but do go through the process for 5 different ideas. And most importantly, emphasize why your app is best on a mobile device versus a web app. So for instance, some people will say, I want to create an app that lets me order food for a particular restaurant or chain of restaurants. That's okay, but what makes that different than just opening up a web page? So some of you are taking the web dev course, that's fine. That project would be better suited for that class. For my class, you can do that, but I want you to emphasize in this homework assignment why it's better than on a mobile device. And if it's not, it's probably not a good candidate for a mobile app. So if you do really want to do an app, maybe you can throw in some mobile technologies, such as, well, I want to order, but maybe I'm at a friend's house, like ordering pizza, right? And I don't want to have to put in my address because I don't know what the address is of my friend's house, and to it's just, I don't want to have to type in my address or pull it up from an address book or whatever. So you can either use the address book from the phone, or you can use the GPS and do reverse DNS, or not reverse DNS, reverse geocoding on that. So you get the GPS location, which will then, you can send that off to a Google server and they'll give you back the street address for that GPS location. Pretty cool. And vice versa. You can give it an address and it'll give you the GPS location. So anyway, that's technology that you would put into that app if you wanted to do that idea that would make it something that either a web app can't do, or in some cases they can do it, but maybe not as smoothly as a mobile app, such as like GPS. GPS is notoriously hard to get from a mobile or a web browser. So you can do it, but it's not as easy. All right, so here's kind of an example of a mobile app idea that I'm going to pretend to implement. And so this is kind of what I'm looking for this first homework assignment. Create an app so users can find a place to eat on campus based on location, interests, and who you're with. All right, so there's 3 different features to that idea. I'm going to have you look up competition. So here's the competition. Again, these are just made up, but BSU Food Finder competes with my app. Bronco Eats competes with the app. And then there's a general Boise foodie app out there that also lists restaurants and stuff, but not necessarily to college students. So I want to focus my audience on the BSU student body, or anyone that's visiting campus, whether that's incoming freshmen, parents, or whatever. So I'm going to limit my app and I'm going to focus on restaurants just surrounding the Boise campus, which obviously is several different places throughout the city. So I'm going to incorporate that into my app. A lot of you get dinner after this. It's like, okay, where do I want to go? That's within walking distance, etc. And then a 4th category is technologies. What technologies is it going to take for you to build out this application? So again, I'm in the computer science building right now. That'll give me a GPS location, and then based on that, I can show all the restaurants around that in a map view. And maybe I'm going to have a camera to maybe check into the restaurant, old school, what was that app called? Foursquare, was it called? I don't know, never used it, but something like that where you can check into different places and become the mayor of it, or maybe get discounts at that restaurant, yada, yada. Maybe I need an XML parser or maybe a database to read an input. So if I want to add a new restaurant, maybe one just opened up down the street, I don't have to re-release my application to the App Store and then have everybody download that update so they can get the new data. Maybe I put that up as an XML file, a JSON file, or create a database that I put up there. We'll actually talk about how to implement all that in this class. I'll need a network to pull that data down, or maybe some other piece of information, maybe what the weather is, that sort of thing. And then I also want to have a feature in there, which I didn't talk about, but an accelerometer for a shake feature. One of the very first apps that I ever did was a mixed drink recipe application. And so basically what it was is if you wanted a White Russian or a mudslide or any of those types of drinks, what ingredients would you need in that? And it had search feature and everything. But if you didn't know, you could actually shake the phone and it would give you a random mixed drink that you could try at a party, right? Have you? That app was actually, I have the clip somewhere. That app, and again, this was the first app I ever did back in 2008 or 2009. They talked about they didn't name it by name, but I'm like 50% sure it was actually mine because there was another app out there that did the same thing in The Big Bang Theory. So Sheldon is at the bar with Penny, I believe, the bartender, and he has, I'm going to say my app. It's probably not though, but on his phone, and he's like, he brings up some like random drink, and she's like, "No, I don't know how to make that." He's like, "Oh, it's right here." So I did save that clip somewhere, but yeah, it's probably not my app, but he never really said what it was, but it was a mixed drink app. And again, I had one of the first ones out there, so who knows? Anyway, all right. So the fifth section, I kind of had to go on another slide here. Suggested price. So my suggested price is $1.99, which may sound a little high, but all of the competitor apps are 99 cents, and they seem to be doing really well in the App Store. So why am I going to charge more? Well, because because I'm awesome. No, but because my app's going to have substantial differences in quality, features, updates, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to try to justify it. This is kind of wishy-washy in terms of justifying. You will likely get more downloads than your competitors. If theirs looks like some programmer designed it, then again, they're not going to get that many downloads as if it looked like it had a professional designer put a treatment on it for you. So we'll talk about all that in marketing and what not to do. So those are 5 sections. Again, what is your idea? Explain your idea to me. Competition. Go out on the Play Store, the Google Play Store, and find apps. If you're doing like a homework assignment app, search homework assignment, search homework, search school, search whatever you can think of to find apps that are your competitors. Look at those apps and see if they are competition or they're just similar but in different spaces. So there might be a school app, but it doesn't handle homework assignments or tracking homework assignments. Or maybe it does, but it does it in a different way. So I want you to go out there and do what we call market research. Figure out, hey, if there's a trillion apps out there, or maybe not that many, but there's just a ton of apps that do it. They do it well. They're made by professionals, and there's probably no likely way that you're going to break into that space and be successful. Then still write it up as a homework assignment, but maybe you don't do it because again, the competition is just too strong. Unfortunately, too many mobile developers, or actually people in general, do not do any market research before they launch their app idea or their product. I don't know what it is. Maybe they just don't care. Maybe they don't know any better. But yeah, they'll be like, oh yeah, I got this great idea that does this and that does that. And people are just like, yeah, there's a product that does that. And they're just like, oh, really? And anyway, do your market research because you'll save yourself a lot of headaches. And even if you do find competition, what are they doing well? What are they doing poorly? How can you either steal that market from them by doing what they do poorly better? All right, so let's get into actual Android talk. I'll post the homework assignment. Actually, we'll recap it again at the end of the day today. But real quick, let's go through the Android project structure. We're going to talk about activities, Android activities, lifecycle, all that fun stuff. But just to throw this at you, this is the Android project structure. So as we start developing Android apps, you will see this folder structure in your projects. So the first one, and probably the most important, is the SRC, or the source folder. Yes, go ahead, question?
Just going back to the homework, when is it due?
I'll get to that later.
Okay.
Next week to give you a, yeah, sorry. Again, I'll recap it all at the end, but.
So I had a question about the,
okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering about, like, if we plan to integrate some maybe copyrighted material, do we have to worry about licensing for that? I don't know if you plan to have this like.
Yeah, so to include copyright material in your Android app, as long as you don't release it to the App Store, you're using it for educational purposes, which falls under copyright, most probably. I'm not a lawyer, but yeah, if you're using it for educational purposes, it's fine. Again, yeah, don't release it to the App Store or use it for any profit.
At least change the copyrighted stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you download some graphics, you could always you can change the look and feel of it, and that becomes a derivative work. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my advice on that. But look it up. And personally, if you have like a photo that somebody else took in there, I'm not going to take off points for that. Again, just don't use it for profit.
Do you require for us to put this on the Play Store? But
No.
Okay.
No, that's $25, and I don't. This class is totally free. We don't have a textbook. We don't have any. I mean, besides your computer, which you have to have for school, that's about it. Or you can use the lab computers wherever the lab is.
Rent a laptop.
Yeah, you can rent one, which costs money, but
Well, from the
you get that. Yeah. Okay.
check them out.
Yeah, check them out. Get free laptops. That's right. Thank you. But yeah, so I try to keep everything free. So I don't require you to release it to the App Store, but it's a $25 fee, I think it was last time I checked. And that's good for life. So you pay it once, and then you can keep it 10 years, release an app in 10 years or 5 years or who knows. So that's up to you, but I'm not going to make you pay to pass an assignment in this course. Okay, cool. So let's get through these real quick because I got some a little bit of code and stuff to show you. So we got the source folder, and that's where you put all your either Java files or Kotlin files. We have the resources or res folder, and this is where all the resources go, and then resources are pretty much everything below this. So we have drawables, and these are going to be images or vector graphics, layouts, so these are going to be your interfaces, menus. In Android, we have a menu which drops down or opens up, and you can have an entirely different layout for that, but that goes specifically in the menu, and that is XML based. Values, pretty much any value you want to put in there that's not that is a constant, you can put in the values. So these can be strings, these can be numbers, these can be whatever. If you want strings as in like button strings or labels and that sort of thing, you put them in the strings resource, which is also an XML file. So this you can put phone numbers, URLs. Kind of a rule is to put everything in the strings file that you want translated. So your app name is actually going to go in there, but everything else like button labels, text, edit text hints, the description for it, that sort of thing. Because if you're ever going to translate it, say German or Japanese or anything like that, then you can give that one strings file to a translator, then go and then change the values of it, give it back to you, and then that'll automatically work. And so things like URLs, you might want to drive them to a Japanese website versus a German website versus an English-speaking website. Phone numbers, of course, if you have a phone number in those particular countries, you can change those out as well. So they're not necessarily words per se, but they're kind of things that you might want translated or localized. Styles, you can put styles in here such as margins, colors, theme values, all that fun stuff goes in styles. And then the dimensions you can also put in padding and margins and stuff like that. There's really I don't think there's any enforcement of these. It just looks weird if you're sticking a string in a style, for instance. You can do it, I think. Never tried it, but I know you can stick like values and dimensions and kind of mix those up a little bit. Anyway, so last class we talked a little bit about resolution and screen size, et cetera, et cetera. So I do want to kind of go over this really quickly, but just to talk about it again, we have actual physical dimensions of an Android tablet or a phone. So we have 2, 4, 7, 10, everywhere in between, of course. I think there's probably bigger than 10. But if you have a 2-inch screen, that's going to be like an Android Wear device, like a watch or some other kind of wearable. And then you have the normal range, which is around 3 to 4+ inches. So those are going to be more of your phones, your regular phone size back in the day. But now we have like these, what are they called, phablets, these phone tablets. That'll kind of fall under the large category, about the 6-inch to 7-inch range. And then the extra large, which are more like the tablets, like the Nexus 10 and that sort of thing, which 10 inches. Screen real estate or screen physical state. So those are generalized. Obviously, it really depends on the device, but then we have pixel density. So how many pixels do they cram into each inch? Now, as I mentioned last class, if you had like an image that was 100 pixels by 100 pixels, well, if there was 100 pixels per inch, that would mean that the image size is 1 inch by 1 inch, whereas if you had a pixel density of like 50, then that would be actually 2 inches. And so this is why we use the density independent pixels, is because I don't want one image on one screen to be 2 inches wide and 2 inches tall versus another screen which is only 1 inch by 1 inch, or however the pixels get packed in there. So all those density independent pixels takes into account how many pixels per inch is it, and then it does the calculations for you. So anyway, a 1 inch image on a pixel independent screen will be the same as another size that has a different resolution. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, just don't worry about it. It's all taken care of for you. One more thing I wanted to mention from this slide is we have a low density, a medium density, a high density, an extra density, and this image is outdated because they have a XX and a triple high, extra high density pixel range, and those are going to fall into not only the tablets but the high density tablets. I think the screenshot came from the Android developer website, and it's kind of old at this point, and it's probably before they had like the Retina displays and the high density. What do they call those? That was the Apple term, was Retina display. I don't know, whatever marketing term that we have. So all you have to do is just lay it out on the screen. This is one of the screens that is set up for a phone, but there are buttons up here as part of the interface. For this case, it's a Nexus 4. You can drop down that menu and see what it looks like on a Nexus 10 or a Pixel 2 or a Pixel 1. And see what the screen real estate looks like, see what the resolution looks like, and see how your layout looks on those different devices. So, all right, so just to remind you, we're going to talk about activities today. We'll get to fragments and the other objects in a future class, but just to remind you, activities is another name for a user interface screen. These are inherited from the activity superclass. We talked about these before. And if you want more information about density, size, orientation, aspect ratio, yada, 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 I'll provide this link in the documentation, but you can see some of the values that we have in here. Oh, there's also TV DPI for large screen TVs, I guess. Not really sure, but never dealt with it. All right, so I misnamed this slide, but this is supposed to be the Android lifecycle. All right, so when we start an Android application, our default application will start off with one activity, our main activity, and it goes into these different states. So basically it starts at the bottom, non-existent, and then on the left-hand side of that image, we launch the application or we launch the activity specifically, and this is where our onCreate method gets called. So again, I kind of had you put all that code in the onCreate. That's basically our entry point into our application's first activity. All right, so then it goes into the stopped state. So after everything's set up, our activity is in the stopped state, which doesn't really make sense, but you'll see why in a second. Then the activity becomes visible to the user, namely it comes up on their phone. And then there's another function called onStart, and this is what gets called at that point. And then your app goes into the paused state. So it goes from stopped to pause. You get a callback called onStart in between, so you can do a little bit more setup if you need to. Setup that you can't do on the onCreate. So the onCreate, if you try to do any code that, I don't know, did some animation or something like that, you would never see it because your application's in the stopped state. Actually, it's in the non-existent state going into the stopped state. The onStart is your application's not, or your activity is not running, it's still paused, but you can do a little bit of setup now that it's visible. So again, after it comes out of the stop state into the pause state, your application's visible, so it says visible to the user, goes into that pause state, and then it goes to the foreground and things start happening, buttons, or not, any animations that you have. People can start tapping on buttons and start interacting with your activity. And so we call that the foreground. It enters the foreground, and you get a callback on this called onResume before it actually starts running. Okay, so you get a lot of flexibility in how your interface gets laid out. So for instance, if you have something that's really heavy-handed, let's say a database call or a network call, that you don't necessarily need in your interface, like you don't need those values in your interface yet, well, go ahead, put what you need in the onCreate, onStart, or whatever, and then in your onResume, pretty much at the last second, all your interface is already on the screen. Then you can start either fetching things and, or just, again, those heavy, highly complex operations. Sorry, I can't think of the word. But again, you can delay those actions until your interface is already to the screen. And so this might be something that you need to do, or for instance, like to disable buttons or to get text from buttons, you can't really do it on the onCreate because the button doesn't actually technically exist yet. Okay, so we're running the application, the user's manipulating the interface, they're typing in text, they're hitting buttons, they're doing whatever, and then I get a phone call, or I switch apps. Okay, now it goes through this different phase of on pause. So anything that happens that you need to pause, you can write that code in the on pause. So if you're playing a game or you're playing music, that's a good point to pause the game, pause the music, stop the network stream or whatever you're working on. And then we get an on stop, and then it goes all the way down to on destroy, except it doesn't always go to on destroy. It could go to on stop if it's not visible, if I switch out of the application. It can stay in the stop state until I bring up the application again, and then it jumps over to visible to user, on start gets called, on pause, on enters foreground, to on resume, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, we can follow all these different paths. It can go from running to paused. Maybe I get a text message, or the activity could stop if an action pops up over top of this. That might have cause to pause the application. So you'll get this callback on pause, and then that goes away, and then on resume gets called again. So you can actually kind of cycle through these two states. It could go down to a stop state and back up to running state. The only reason why I would go, well, not the only, there's a couple reasons why I would go down to a non-existent state. And we'll get to that in 2 seconds. Yes, question?
Yeah. So it's possible to like run code while it's not visible, because you just put in the on-stop state.
Sorry, say that one more time.
Is it possible to run code while it's not visible? Like you just put in the on-stop state?
It's a function call, so you put in the on-stop function, and then you'll get that call back, and that code will execute.
So you can like run database queries that are heavy while they're not using the app.
Yeah, but you'd probably, some of that time you just run on a different thread too. But if you don't want to call it until the interface is there are some things where you want to manipulate the interface and you need it on the screen and working, and physically there in order to manipulate it. Sorry, the live stream apparently is not working. Half hour in, I just noticed it. Let me see. The screens are not changing. Of course, everything was working until I hit the play button, I guess. That's so weird. That is strange. Okay, that seems to work. All right, so sorry for the delay, but yeah, somebody messaged me on the live chat and I totally ignored it for like, I don't know, who knows how long. My apologies for that, for the people that are streaming. But okay, so anyway, we'll just keep it there for now. I don't know if it went because I changed my... It's hard to keep both of these things on the same screen. Cool, she can see it now. All right, thank you for letting me know. Sorry it took me so long. Okay, all right, so activities in Android. Again, we put all of our code in the controller. This is a design paradigm. We call it the controller versus the layout, or some as you may know it as the model view controller paradigm. So we have the model, which is the data. We have the controller, which is kind of the middleware between the model and then the layout, or the view, which is our actual presentation to the user. So again, the layout goes in the XML file. We talked about that. And then we also declare, when you add an activity to the Android application, you actually have to declare it in something called the Android manifest file. And if you know what a manifest is, it is a list of things within a container. So like an airline will keep a passenger manifest, and that's just the names of all the passengers on an airline. Ships and shipping things will keep a manifest of what products and boxes and containers are on their ship or whatever. Same thing with the Android manifest. It'll keep an account of all of the activities within your application. Now, Android Studio does this for you, so if we add a second activity, then it will automatically add it to the manifest. So here's actually what Android Studio does for you. It creates when you go ahead and create a second activity, it creates a subclass of activity. It creates the layout for you, usually. You can have it not if you want to. And then it adds the following lines to the Android manifest file. So this is XML, and basically just names your activity. So in the past, we had to do this manually. Android Studio said, why you have to do it manually when I can do it for you? And all was good after it did that. So you never have to worry about it, but do notice that if Android ever complains that it doesn't find your activity, check the Android manifest file. It has to be in there. And if you want to change, if you add a second activity and you want to use that as the launch activity, you would actually do that in the Android manifest file. We'll talk about that in another class, though. All right, so activity death. So how do we get to that non-existent state that I showed you in that previous graphic? And by the way, for those on the stream that didn't see the graphic, my apologies. This was the life cycle. So if you're ever interviewing for an Android position, and I've interviewed dozens of people on this, I always kind of ask a question on the Android, on the life cycle. I say, can you give me an overview of the Android the activity life cycle? There's actually a fragment life cycle which looks very similar to this with a lot more branches. Again, we'll get to that when we talk about fragments. But you'll be surprised of all the people that interview for an Android position that don't actually know how this works. And I don't expect you to memorize it. I wrote down a nice little way of remembering it, and it's traperster. So that's just all the different states. You can remember that, right? So what do they call that? Those memory tricks. Can't remember the name of it, but anyway, no, I'm just kidding. It is hard, and sometimes I have to go, okay, OnCreate's first, and then is it on resume or on pause? It's like, oh, yeah. So, yeah, just do your best when it comes to these things. But do understand that OnCreate is first. There's an OnDestroy to clean up some stuff after your activity goes away to the great memory manager or the great garbage collector in the sky. And anyway, so that's the life cycle for those who missed it on the live stream. Sorry. Okay, so how do we get to that non-existent state at the bottom of that life cycle? Well, a couple of things. You can rotate the device, and that will kill your activity. So that might sound strange to some people, because why would you kill a whole activity when you just rotate it? Because Android is super, super old, it doesn't actually do this as much on the newer operating systems. Every once in a while it does, but I think I checked this, and it was hard for me to actually get it to be killed when you rotate the device, but sometimes it still happens. I've seen it. Anyway, I don't have any scientific proof of that. One of these days I'll look it up and see if this is still true. But back in the day, when you changed phone orientations, what had to happen on the hardware, because the hardware was so old, that it had to basically recreate everything. And so Android has this kind of built-in system to easily recreate an activity from scratch. This is really annoying if you don't implement this, because if I rotate the device and I have maybe my username and password filled in, well, those go away because I've rotated the device, the activity goes away, it gets recreated, those edit texts come back up to the screen and they're blank because, they're newly created. And so Android, as I mentioned, has an easy way to grab those values, save them off to a saved instance state, and then bring them back when the activity is recreated. Oh yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention on the activity lifecycle. OnCreate only happens once. Okay, so you'll, besides the fact that it gets destroyed, OnCreate will always get called just once, whereas OnResume might happen over and over and over and over again if people are switching applications back and forth. But for the life of the activity, OnCreate only gets called once. That's not to say during the application lifecycle that OnCreate doesn't get called once. We'll show you that in an example, but just wanted to call that out because a lot of people will put code into OnCreate that if it gets executed more than once will actually crash their application. So just call that out now. All right, where are we? All right, so the other reasons why your activity might die or get killed is your phone and the operating system is trying to reclaim memory. You have 1,000 different apps open. Those apps are taking up memory. Your app is kind of in the background, not being used. It can actually kill your activity or a background activity. So we can have multiple activities in the app, and maybe there's one that hasn't been used in a while. Android will go through and say, okay, this hasn't been used for a while. I'm going to kill this. And if the user ever goes back to that activity, it gets recreated. All right, so if it's paused or stopped and the on state has already been called, this is an instance of when the activity will actually get, when the onCreate will actually get called again. We'll talk about that in a second. I'll just get through these. The back button is pressed. So the way that Android works is if you call up a new activity, that activity goes on top of the old activity. You can only really have one activity on the screen at one time. And so when I hit the back button, that back button, the behavior of that back button actually kills that top activity. And so that'll kill your activity, of course. System reboot, obviously, kills everything. And then if it hasn't been used in a long time, it's just been dormant for a while, or there's a low memory state, it'll get rid of your activity. So plan on your activity dying. So how do we plan on our activity dying? This is kind of what I wanted to get to. We have this function that you may have seen called onSaveInstanceState. This gets called right before your activity gets destroyed. And we can save the state out to a hash map or a key value paired dictionary, if you want. They go by lots of different names: associative array, hash map. Anyway, so we can say, okay, your username and password, or let's say I'm filling out an order form and I have my name, I have my address, etc. I can take those values out of my edit text and store it in some key. And the key is arbitrary, it's up to you as a developer, but the key could be first name, and then there could be another entry for second name, and we put these values, in this case it's a put int, I'm putting it into this little bundle. It's of type bundle, by the way. State instance state. A saved instance state. Excuse me. And so we kind of jam all these values into this hash map, and then in our onCreate, this is code that I kind of skimmed over before when I was showing you your applications. If saved instance state is not equal to null, meaning it's being passed in to onCreate, which means your activity is actually getting recreated. So you can kind of use this as a way to see if your activity is being created the first time or it's being recreated to check to see if this is null. So if it is not null, that means it's being recreated. And now you can pull out from this saved instance state bundle your keys. And so I'm just using an integer in this case. This is the default value, by the way, if that key was never entered. So that's just what that second parameter is. So I'm just pulling out the key, and I'm getting the int value. And then from that int value, I can put that back into my edit text or use that to recreate my interface. So a little bit of a headache. I'll show you. I want to show you this because this code exists in every file, every activity that you will encounter. So I want you to understand and even how to use it if you need to, because you almost always will at least once or twice in an application. But once we go to fragments, fragments kind of solve this for us. We don't have to do this anymore with fragments, or at least to this extent. But we'll get there. All right, let's see. Okay, so again, we're going to save. We're using getters and putters into this bundle. And we can use serializable if we want to put in like classes or other non-basic types. So anything that's like an integer, string, float, bool, these are still considered basic types, even though they're first-class citizens in Kotlin. If you want to stick in something bigger and more complex, you can basically put in anything that adheres to the interface serializable. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But if you've worked with Java, you probably do know what serializable is. Just has to adhere to the serializable interface. And you can find out more information on that there. Okay, let's see. I got a couple more slides. Let's get through these really quickly. If you want to test out activity death, it's really hard to trigger in today's phones. But in your emulator and on your hardware, you can actually go into developer options. And to get developer options, you have to enable it. It depends on the phone. It depends on the Android operating system. Sometimes you tap like the about or the version, the OS version 7 times. Like you literally tap on the entry 7 times. You can find out how to enable dev mode on your Android device. Just look up, like if you have a Pixel 2, just look up Pixel 2 enable debug mode. But once you get that debug options or the developer options, there is a field that's called don't keep activities. And so pretty much it'll get rid of activities as often as it can. So if you have a second activity, bring that second activity off, it'll almost always kill that first activity with that checkbox, whether it needs to or not. So that's a great way to check to see if your interface gets recreated after it comes back onto the screen. All right, so homework 2, sorry I kind of put these at the end. I should have thought that you guys would want to know the due date. It's next week, the 30th, end of the day. I want PDFs only. Any other format gets a 0. I say this every class, every semester, and there's still people that will submit like a text edit or a notepad, a .text file of their homework assignment. Don't do that. PDF, please. You can create PDFs from Word documents, from LaTeX, or LaTeX, excuse me, files, whatever you want to use. Just make sure the final product is a PDF. That's the more professional way of submitting papers and documents and estimates and proposals and all that fun stuff. Same thing as our first homework assignment, submitted as homework 2 in your GitLab repo. In Blackboard, I do have a new column to say whether I have your Git repo and I have access to it and I can read files. It's just a complete or incomplete. So if you don't see anything yet, it's just haven't gotten to your repo yet. But if you do see that it's complete, your repo is good, I have permissions, everything is good. If it says incomplete, go figure it out or come ask me and say, hey, why don't why don't you have access to my repo? It's either you didn't add it to GitLab, you didn't add me to your project, or I don't have permissions. Or maybe you added one of my other accounts that I have on GitLab. So multitude of reasons. All right, so here's something that, again, I want to call out because people oft forget about this. So I have 5 sections. I have the app idea, I have the technologies, the price, the audience, and the competition. So that's 5 sections. That's per app, okay? So you're going to have 25 sections, essentially, because you have 5 app ideas. For each one of those 5 app ideas, I want 5 sections. For some reason, people, they just leave whole sections out. Okay, so if you do that, so this is just a recap of what we talked about. The first slides. I'll also post these slides to the repo. I'll send out the link to the repo in an email, hopefully tonight, maybe tomorrow. Here's just a recap of what I talked about in there. So I have these 5 sections. There's 4 here, and there's 1 there. All right, so here's the grading I was trying to get to. So if you don't submit it as a PDF, so no appropriate submission, you get a 0. For the code, it doesn't really work out. So if you do have a homework assignment, or you submit a homework assignment as a PDF, and you have requirements that are missing, maybe you only give 4 sections per 5 of the app ideas. You'll get somewhere around a 3, depending upon how egregious it is. It could go below a 3. So don't give me 1 section and think you'll get a 3. I can do that. 4 is you've done everything I've asked you to. You've added the 5 sections for 5 apps, 5 app ideas. That's a 4. If you want more points, usually I'll give you ideas of how to get there. So for this homework assignment, it is a proposal to me of what final you want to implement. So maybe you can write a little paragraph or something that says why you're passionate about it, why you're qualified to build it, and you can treat me as a client that will be paying you, albeit in a grade, but will be paying you to develop it. And so if you're saying, well, I want to build a computer vision, artificial intelligent, Arduino interfaced app that plays games, and I go, okay, well, what makes you an expert in doing that? And you say, well, I've never done it before, I just want to try it. I say, well, it's probably not a very good reason. But if you say, oh, I've done this and I've done that, maybe I haven't done this, but I'm passionate about these things, that'll get you a little bit higher points. Make the document designed a little bit better. Maybe put a header on it, add some font treatments. Again, don't just give me Courier New blah on the screen, just kind of stream of consciousness type stuff. Maybe organize it, make it look pretty. If I look at it and go, wow, that'll get you a lot more points. So spice it up a little bit. See what you can do with it. I'll leave the creativity up to you. I'm happy to give you more ideas. For this first homework, or this first kind of prelude into trying to get a 5, I'll be a little bit more lenient on you. I'll be like, okay, yeah, he or she added they put a header to the top. They put their name on it. That's always good. If I don't see your name on the project, yes, I know I got it from your repo, but anyway, if I don't see your name, I'm less likely to give you extra points on it just because I'm like, eh. So put your name, put all the information on there, make it look pretty. You can maybe do some sketches if you want. Again, that's not the requirements, but it's above and beyond. So that'll get you a 5. Any questions on that? All right, I got one more thing. Here's an example of the grading that was from the last quotes. I don't know why I don't have this open. Let's go through the life cycle really quickly, and I'll let you go. So let's take about 5 minutes. Just want to show you where these functions are, how they get called, and I'll even show you how to debug your application. Okay, so here's the application from the last couple classes. I'm going to put a breakpoint on line 17 in our onCreate. So here's our famous onCreate method, save state instance. We also have to pass that to the superclass's implementation of onCreate. But as you notice, in this line, or in this implementation, we don't have that if save state is not equal to null. So we're just ignoring the fact that this is recreated. Actually don't have this set up to, I don't think, to recreate the activity. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here. You'll see that this gets called. Does anybody remember what comes after onCreate? Okay, oops, I don't know why this didn't come up. Let me show you that shortcut real quick because it's probably one you'll use a whole lot in this class in Android development. Control O, at least that's what it is on Mac. I'm sure it's similar on Windows. This will bring up your overridden methods for an activity. So as you can see, we're inherited from the android.app.activity, as I mentioned in the notes. And these are all the functions that we can override. And there's other classes in here, like context wrapper, etc. But if I just start typing, so I'm going to type on start. This doesn't come up. As you can see, it's like on and then a whole bunch of words and then starts in there. So it is pretty smart in how it searches. But if you hit the down arrow twice, you'll get to this one. And we're going to implement this. Okay, and I'm going to put a breakpoint there. Okay, so after on start, anybody? On resume, thank you. Just make sure you're selecting the right one. On post resume. On resume fragments. So on resume, just that one. Okay, next one. Coming down the list. On pause. There it is. And command or control O. Stop. Yep, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to put breakpoints in all of these and run our application. But I'm not going to hit the play button because our breakpoints will never get called. I do that all the time where I'm like, oh, when my breakpoint get hit, and I'm like, oh, I'm not in debug mode. If you're in debug mode and you don't want the breakpoints to get hit, you actually have to stop your application and then hit the play or hit the play button. So these are different. So again, if you want those you go. Come on. I should have hit the button and then explained what it was. Come on, you can do it. Here we go. So you'll see the whole screen. Okay, sometimes you just need to run it again. Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Oh, I think I was in the middle of the thought last class, and perfect. Thank you. It was funny because I was looking for the error, but sometimes you get so focused on what you're trying to do. I was like, I didn't even write any code. How can it break? I must have hit a number. Or... Yep. Okay, so you'll see waiting for the debugger pops up. Okay, here's our breakpoint. It gets hit. It goes over to tab number 5 down here called debug. It's the bottom left-hand corner. I don't know if you can see that in the back. And so on the left-hand side, we have our stack trace. And you can see all the Android SDK functions to get in there. If you have nested functions, if you guys know what stack traces are, you can trace down the functions that get called before this. We have our variables here. So this is the main activities class. So if we have any member variables, which we don't, as part of our class, you can see this, all those member variables in there. And then we have the saved instance state. Hopefully you can see it's kind of small, but that's what that variable is that's highlighted. It is equal to null, so we know that our activity is not being recreated. It's being created for the first time. And then we have our breakpoint stopped on line 17. Right, so our controls for the step over, I'll go over this in more detail in another class, but just kind of give you an idea. We have step over, so I can step over that line of code, kind of look and investigate my variables. So we have a new variable called hello text view. I'll step over that. I can step into pieces of code. Now, if I get down to this button listener, it's going to go on line 24, and then it's going to skip over to basically line 27. And obviously, this inner code doesn't get executed. So if I want to stop on that, I'd have to explicitly put a breakpoint there. Now, if I want to continue, meaning I just want my execution to continue through this, I would hit this play button, or resume, I should call it. The resume button, resume program here. Don't hit this play button. I've done that a couple times where I'm in the middle of a debugging session, trying to track my variables, and I go, okay, let's resume. And for whatever reason, I hit that button. I'm like, oh, almost instantaneously. So to resume it's down here. I don't usually do that anymore, but yeah, anyway, it happens. Okay, so then onStart gets called. So that was obviously after onCreate, resume, onCreate, onStart, onResume, hit the play button. Now it's in that running state. I am going to hit the back button. You can probably hit the home button or any other button there. Actually, I'll just hit home. Okay, so I hit home. You can see the application's down in the background. OnPause gets called, and then OnStop gets called. What I forgot to do is onDestroy, but I'll set up the emulator for next class. I'll show you that at the beginning of the next class to show that it gets called. But that's the life cycle. And if I bring it back up, I'll hit the select my application again. So onStart, and then onResume. Notice onCreate didn't get called twice. I would have to destroy my activity for that to get called. So anyway, again, that's the activity life cycle. We'll talk about it more and more throughout the class, but you get the idea. I'll post this up on the repo. I'll send out the link to the repo. I will stay around for questions, answer questions, but you're free to go. Thanks, guys.
All I'm trying to do here with my app is just break the text